Hi, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Super Solar event on solar jobs. I'll just give it a couple of minutes while everybody joins the webinar. Okay, my name is Mike Walls. I'm Professor of Photovoltaics at CREST at Loughborough University, and I'm the Director of the EPSRC Solar Network. And this is one of the events for this year. Just want to say a few words on the background to today's webinar and publicise some future events that we're holding in the next 3 months, and then I'll hand over to Sabine McGinley, who will chair this event. So we've got a great list of speakers, which you can see on this slide. I'd like to pay a particular thanks to Dr. Richard Hall, who's helped us pull this event together. Thanks to Richard. So what's the backdrop to this? Well, the backdrop is that solar is booming across the world. It's the fastest growing form of new energy generation. In 2022, we're expecting that over 200 gigawatts of solar will have been produced during the year. It's also booming in the UK. So right now we have about 15 gigawatts being deployed, but things are really moving fast. This is a slide kindly sent to me by Solar Energy UK, which is the Solar Trade Association in this country. And you can see there the projections from pessimistic to optimistic that were made in 2019 with a view to achieving 40 gigawatts by 2030. And in fact, this slide was actually produced, as you can see, in June 21. And right now it's booming so much that we're in fact well ahead of the green curve. You can see there, which was the optimistic one, where we would end up with, we are going to end up with more than 40 gigawatts by 2030. And the current projections is that we will end up with 70 gigawatts by 2035. That's an enormous increase in capacity. So it's a rapidly expanding industry, and it's obviously a good place to be. So with that in mind, we've got another couple of events during the over the next 3 months. The first is a meeting at the Institute of Physics. This is an in-person meeting on advances in photovoltaics with a particular focus on bifacial and tandem PV. We've got a great list of speakers. You can see some of those listed there. And in addition, we've got one of my colleagues, Xiaolei Liu, who will also be talking on device architectures. We're requesting contributed talks, and all we need is a title. We must have the title in before 18th of November. In January, we are supporting an event at the Royal Institute of Chemistry, Royal Society of Chemistry. You can see the invited speakers there, a very distinguished list. Again, we're looking for contributed oral and poster titles. So you can get in touch with the organizers there you can see the details at the bottom. And just a final reminder that if for any reason you've got childcare issues, you've got responsibilities, the Super Solar does have a fund that will cover some of these expenses. All you need to do is go onto the Super Solar website, find the application form and submit it. And I'm sure that we will be able to help you with any additional costs. So I would now like to hand over to Sabine McGinley, who is the Commercial Manager for Digital Data and Technology Procurement, the Department of International Trade. I believe Sabine was formerly with Solar Energy UK, the trade association. So over to you, Sabine.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So I'm Sabine, a first-year commercial fast streamer, currently at Department of International Trade. And as Mike mentioned, I was previously with Solar Energy UK working in communications. So Solar UK was the trade body representing installers, developers, manufacturers, everyone throughout the solar energy supply chain, which was, to me, great exposure to the industry, and obviously growing at breakneck speed, as the previous slide just showed. So yeah, we have a bit of an idea of the kind of rich variety of roles that are now available in the sector. So yeah, definitely not just installation jobs in the sector. It's everything and anything, from business analysis, data kind of roles, policy, communications, procurement, the whole lot. So here today to present an excellent panel of speakers who are going to talk to you about careers in the solar sector beyond academia. So if you do have any questions for each speaker, feel free to pop them in the question and answer box in the bottom, and then we can field them through after each presentation at the end. So without further ado, first up we have Dr. Richard Hall, Clean Energy Sector Specialist, working also at DIT, Department of International Trade, to support the government in attracting overseas investment to kind of grow the clean energy sector in the UK. So Richard's a trained civil engineer who specialises in solar energy for thermal processes and has a rich academic background working in solar governance, most recently for the International Energy Agency. So Richard, over to you.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so I want to talk to you about this. You're absolutely right. So if you think about what jobs in the solar energy in the UK, you might be like, oh, installer. And maybe if you're sort of an academic, sort of, I guess a bit like I am, I got an energy doctorate, you might be like, well, it's not really where, where are the jobs in the solar sector? So I want to talk to you about this thing called solar energy governance and sort of what it is and what it means. So I'll try and run through this. So I'm sure probably, I don't know, like me, you probably look at these sort of government documents that go around and you're like, where is the chapter on solar? There must be some sort of, solar strategy, or there must be a big chapter on solar. But probably when you search through them and you get them and you search solar, you might only see a couple of things. And I sort of want to, go into it sort of, I guess maybe why that is, why it doesn't seem, as I'm sure solar sector is absolutely booming right now. So sort of why isn't there sort of like this sort of solar strategy and stuff? So I want to sort of go through that and essentially give you an indication of sort of where the jobs are in this field. But yeah, so anyway, so I should introduce myself. So yeah, I'm Richard. I work for the Department of International Trade. So our job is to secure UK and global prosperity by promoting sort of international trade. So anything which crosses a border. And in the summer we did a campaign. So we did Made in the UK, Solar in the World, and that included solar. So yeah, I'd be really interested to know whether anyone can tell me what UK solar product this is. I'm sure, given the flexibility and the color of that solar panel, you know sort of exactly what it is. But I'd be super interested to know whether you can tell what it is. So yeah, so solar is part of what we do. But in terms of solar energy governance, it's a really big sort of field, right? It's a really big thing. And I'm going to go into very small part of it, but it's got all these sort of different elements to it. So it's got sort of environmentalism and trade unionism. It's got all these sort of interesting people like Butte and Kissinger and Getty, and it's got all these things about, you know, ideology and, you know, how do you become a scientific superpower and how, you know, your economy enables that to happen. But I'm going to sort of go into sort of maybe the main thing that sort of describes the reason why the UK maybe has a challenging relationship with solar. So what is the sort of central question of global energy governance? Obviously, you know, global means, you know, energy means, but governance. So, you know, what is the central question? So governance is just really the political and economic authority to manage something. So you have sort of corporate governance and you have, you know, governance of the state. And so basically governance is just the sort of, you know, the rules and sort of regulations that go around with a particular sector or particular aspect. And the central question of sort of global energy governance, this thing is how much oil is produced at any given time. And this is like a really serious question. And it's sort of, I don't know, maybe not pitch it too out, but it's one of the central questions of countries, you know, how much oil is produced. And obviously that it's the sort of, this is the central question, but obviously it's the sort of who, when, why, how. But it's a really, really sort of, you know, critical question that gets answered. Now, you might go, well, you know, that's not really what I'm interested in. I'm probably not that, you know, if you're doing solar, you're probably not interested in answer that question. But I think the important bit is that we're sort of entering a transition zone of that question. So the question is changing. And I think that's why there's so much, that's why it's so interesting and why it's so dynamic and why, you know, there's a lot of things going on right now because this question is changing, and the IEA are pretty clear that that question is sort of changing. So, you know, what is the question? Well, I think we're sort of going, we're in this sort of zone between, you know, this question that has been around for, you know, very important for 50 years, but definitely sort of the last 100 years. And before that, it was the coal question. But now we're entering this sort of new period. And this is the question I think, you know, you need lots of people to answer, which is sort of where I guess all the jobs are. And so the new question really is, how many energy electronic devices are being produced at any one time. And so when you see things like the critical mineral strategy, or you see, you know, you sort of read the news, I think it's important that you sort of have this sort of question in mind. So when you're talking about solar energy governance, really you're just working in a particular part of answering this sort of bigger question of global energy governance. And, you know, this is not just solar panels, but also, you know, wind turbine hubs and batteries and electric car chargers. I mean, I'm sure you can look at the news sort of any day and there'll be something around this question, whether it's, you know, the battery factory in Northumberland or whether it's, you know, the CHIPS Act in the USA. So essentially, you know, we're in this period where this is, you know, a really central question that's trying to sort of the system, you know, the governments around the world are trying to answer this question. And it's very serious. So, you might go, well, how many solar panels should be installed in the UK? And you sort of go as many as possible, as fast as you might say, well, we got COP, right? So, you know, the climate change is very important and we just go as fast as possible. But I think what I want to describe is that causes this sort of instability in the system, and that gets described as a solar coaster, but it's a sort of effect of, I guess, the system. So let's have a look at like, what are the issues? So if you think of like the state as this sort of, you know, this sort of this mass of interactions and things like that. So basically, you know, everything is all right as long as you sort of make stuff in your country and you consume the stuff in the country. You know, that sort of cycle goes round and round, and you know, there's really not really much of a sort of issue there. But the challenge comes when obviously those things are not equal, and then you start having to sort of import things, and so this happens in sort of energy and sort of in very big quantities, I guess is the best way to say it. And so you have two states, so then they start interacting with each other, and essentially, as long as the balance, these whole things called balance of payments is sort of it's sort of balanced, you know, I think that, you know, everything is fine. But really, what happens when, you know, and maybe it's just a small imbalance, you know, state A is everything is going to go fine. But when it starts getting really big, and that's the problem, when it starts getting really big. So it starts off small, but then it gets bigger and bigger. And this is what, you know, ends up causing tension. And this is like, maybe, I don't know whether this is like the first rule or, you know, international trade 101, but essentially when you get these sort of huge trade imbalances, then you get this sort of international, this tension in the system. So that's when you see, when you see sort of, these newspaper stories about whether solar is good or bad, what you're really seeing is this tension arising because of these sort of trade imbalances. There's still ways to deal with that. So I guess this is what you might be doing when you're doing so. There's a whole bunch of like things that you can do, and one of it's called recycling. So you're sort of recycling the currency. That's often used in the oil and gas sector. But obviously there's, protectionism. You could sort of go to yourself, let's just ban everything. Let's just ban all the imports and build your own solar factory. But that has real sort of serious consequences. And that's sort of happening now. So the IEA just did an interesting report about the number of sort of protectionist practices happening right now. But what happens there is that the cost of solar goes up. So the cost of solar to the consumer goes up, and the global rate goes down. So the global installation rate goes down. So then, so is that a good thing to get your own solar panel factory up and running, or is it a bad thing? That's definitely sort of a question which needs to be answered. And also, it's just not really sort of, imagine the UK did it. It's not really, we are champion for free trade. So essentially protectionist measures, they are possible, but, it's not necessarily the best thing to do. So what really do you want to do? So how do you sort of, if you sort of see this sort of trade imbalance occurring and you're like, well, how do we sort of resolve that problem? Well, really, you just have to find something to start trading with. You have to find your state's competitive advantage. And so that's sort of what, I guess, in a sense, that what we do. So you find the competitive product that you make and start then trading it. And you just try and balance those things. And that's sort of, I guess, if you're working in solar energy governance, that's sort of what you're doing. And when you look at the sort of landscape of what we call the energy electronics sector, the UK is very good at energy electronics. So there's any of these companies are world leading companies in energy electronics. So I think maybe if you left us doing a solar degree, you might be quite difficult to find a solar specific company that is looking at the research and innovation side. But actually, there are loads of really advanced energy electronic companies that I'm sure you could definitely go into the private sector. So how do you sort of develop this, get experience in this? So obviously just going into the civil service. So there's a lot of jobs in the civil service and the departments which deal with this, and it's complex and involves lots of different departments, but it's BEIS, it's DIT, it's the Office for Science, it's the Leveling Up department, and also you got the physics laboratory, you got Innovate UK. And so it's very easy. You just need to, and if you go on the civil service website and search for solar, you're not going to find anything. But if you search for net zero, I think there are about 100 jobs open right now for net zero. Or if you search renewable energy or electricity, then there certainly will be something that hopefully would interest you. The Foreign Office, which is the sort of diplomacy side of things, so that's a separate place. So you just go FCDO jobs, then you'll find this sort of country-based website. And that's, so you're going to work in sort of the science and innovation parts. So there are a lot of great science and innovation parts in the FCDO. And then the other people that sort of govern the solar sector are the trade associations. And there's obviously Solar Energy UK is sort of the sort of, I guess, the main solar one, but there's also, lots of different ones, and they're all answering sort of different questions. So some of these are answering, maybe the heat pump question, how many heat pumps are being done, or how many car chargers are being installed. And they're all sort of answering the same question, which is how many energy electronic devices are installed in the UK at any point, but they're also answering just slightly different questions. But all of them will be, I'm sure, be delighted to work with you. And then finally, sort of working in the working groups. So there's this MCS standard for solar PV, and essentially they're working groups, and these are technical standards. So if you're doing a sort of PhD and you're doing some sort of technical aspect of solar PV development, then these MCS working groups are sort of a great place to start in your sort of governance experience. And then finally, the top, is the IEA, which is sort of the main body for answering this sort of big question. But we participate in these things called the technology collaboration programs. And basically there's 3 solar ones. There's the SHC, the PVPS, and the Solar Paces. And you can basically participate in any of those little groups. And the UK is doing our very own one, and it's sort of this obscure part of the solar governance world, but it's called Task 69 Subtask C. And in that, we're going to be funding the answering of the question of how many heating devices are installed in the world and how many should be installed. So that is currently active. So you can currently sign up to sort of participate in that. And if you want to sort of participate, just let me know. And then finally, there's a really interesting event in 2 weeks' time with about China's rise of solar. So there's a really interesting speaker going to talk about how China developed its sector, which should be really sort of interesting and relevant. And yeah, and that's it. So yeah, happy to take any questions now, or I guess at the end. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Richard. That was really interesting to sort of hear about balance payments and kind of trade protectionism. And yeah, really fascinating topic. And definitely would recommend for those of you interested working in the civil service. I know that there are a number of kind of net zero roles across government departments, so definitely worth taking a look. Does anyone in the audience have any questions at this point for Richard, specifically on DIT? Just please pop them in the Q&A box and we can fill them through. If not, Richard, how did you find your kind of background in academia? Were there any transferable skills that you kind of brought into working practically in the industry?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So, I mean, this idea of working so it's not really it's not a real thing. So it's not like, you know, I went to I didn't do any classes in solar energy governance, but I think as you sort of fall into it. So essentially, you start going through these working groups and you start studying the sector and through the IEA TCPs. So essentially, it's very interesting, but it's not an easy thing to get into. So I think, you know, that's my sort of, you know, I sort of fell into it in a sense. So I started with a very technical background. So I did a sort of engineering doctorate in solar energy. But then I started, you know, going into this sort of governance field. And it involves all this, you know, the really complex thing is not one thing. So it's got all this, you know, you need to have the idea of the oil and gas history. You need to have a good idea about international relations. And also you can't be an expert in all these things. And obviously you work with a lot of people. And this really big question is answered by, you know, there's probably 1,000 people working in the civil, I just sort of made the number up, but there's probably 1,000 people working in the civil service, essentially answering that question across, you know, 10 different departments, and they're all working on their little bit. But eventually what happens is that the answer to that question sort of emerges from all those sort of decisions that get made. It's not like there's a sort of person answering. It's not like a single person answering, but, you know, DAT will talk to BEIS, we'll talk to Treasury, we'll talk to, you know, the MOD and stuff like that. So I think this is sort of a really interesting aspect, and it's really important question. I think it's a really important question of how many solar panels should get installed. And it's not, I think the challenge is that it feels like it should be just as many as possible, as fast as possible. But in reality, you're forcing it. It's like you're forcing a condition on the system, which it sort of defends itself. So it's not like there's somebody, you know, it's not like there's somebody, some corner of Whitehall that's really anti-solar and just bringing in all these rules to stop solar panels. It's sort of the system itself is sort of protecting itself. It's sort of maintaining our prosperity. And so as long as you understand that, then you can work with it. And sort of, you know, engage with the system to make sure that you get the solar panels, but you maintain your prosperity. And I think that's the sort of key trick to everything. That makes sense, yeah. Yeah, Mike, you had a question as well.
Yeah. So Richard, I understand you work for government. You're not, you know, you're not a politician.
Yeah. That's definitely true.
But and I see that in some of the Solar Energy UK material that there is a large percentage of new build now carry solar. You know, it's a huge percentage, well over 30%. But what strikes me is, why haven't we changed the building regs so that solar is a requirement for new build? Isn't that a way that government could really change the sort of landscape for energy generation?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. So yeah, I'm not a politician, so don't yeah, this is just conjecture is the word. But basically it's the building regulations are a sort of like an expenditure switching. So I talk about expenditure switching policy. So really what they do is they define what products and services go into new houses. So so if you had a rule of every solar panel should have 10 kilowatts, right? Then what you get is this sort of huge pressure to import because we don't have any domestic manufacturing. And that causes this balance of payments problem. And it's okay when it's a small issue, but obviously when it gets really, really large, so let's say you just did it overnight and gets really large and you don't get your exports up to counteract that balance, then you get all these tensions in the economy. And it's not like, and the tensions come from all over the place because essentially what it does, it reduces your prosperity as a country. So then maybe, some factory closes down in a town and then you got all these, people out of jobs. So when you reduce the prosperity, and it's not like it comes just from government, it's not like government sort of, says, the balance of payments is all wrong and let's do something about it. It sort of comes from the whole of society. So this process comes from everywhere. So it might come from trade unions, or it might come from trade associations, or it might come from different places. And sort of just understanding. So how do you do that? So maybe the best thing is as long as you manage that process, and so you try and get your exports up. And then if you get your exports up, actually you create room for that to happen. So, if we had a large export surplus, then, the import nobody would care, right? Nobody would really mind if there was a huge import of solar panels, I guess. So it's like just understanding that process and how it's sort of the dynamics of how it works out. So, yeah, so SAP or SBEM or like they're sort of telling you what you can import and export. And so if you just open it up, then, you get into sort of a difficult situation. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. I think we've got some questions in the audience. So first one, yes, the session is being recorded. I believe it will be up on the website and in the newsletter, so keep an eye out. Another one from Adam. Are there any science advisory councils specifically advising on the solar industry or perhaps governance? Or is it a rule as part of net zero advisory groups? Richard, no pressure to take that one if it's not your area of expertise, but maybe we can open that one up to the panel.
Yeah, and I think that's that's the kind of role of Super Solar Group, right? That's the sort of the role of and also the SHC, so the Solar Heating and Cooling Program. So yeah, so a lot of academics work in those two things. So yeah, if you want to participate in this process, then yeah, I mean, just like today, right, is a sort of participation in this process. But also the IEA Technology Collaboration Program. So there was also a battery one, which I forgot to mention, but there's also an energy storage TCP. So essentially, a lot of these questions are answered within those TCP programs. And so, yeah, you can definitely participate. So if you want to, you can just maybe when the email shot afterwards, I'll put some details of how to participate in those groups. Yeah, that answers the other question.
Great. And a couple more before we move on to the next speaker. But yeah. One is, how do you participate in SHC? Which I have to be honest, from a layman perspective, I'm not sure what that acronym means. I had a quick guess, maybe.
The Solar Heating and Cooling Program, yeah. So yeah, okay. Just send me an email as the short answer. But yeah, no, we can. Yeah, so we're doing a special project. So yeah, we'll send the information on that in the email shot afterwards.
And then last one, thanks for the great talk. Are there any incentives to encourage manufacturing in the UK rather than solely relying on trade?
Yeah, and I think that is an openly active discussion. So, should we, are we competitive in making a solar panel manufacturing facility? Is that something we should do internally, or do we have, or our competitive advantage in different areas? And I think that's a sort of an active question, which is sort of ongoing. So I don't think there are, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think there are any plans to set up a solar manufacturing facility in the UK. There are some, but I don't think there are any plans. But yeah, let me know if I'm wrong on that. Super.
Great. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, Richard.
All right.
That's really interesting and great questions, so keep them coming. Next up, we have Cam Whitten. So Cam is a senior policy advisor at Green Alliance, an environmental NGO and think tank, which Cam will go on to talk about, working to impact green policy and accelerate environmental governance. I've actually had the great pleasure of working with Cam at Solar Energy UK back when he was head of policy for utility scale solar. So Cam, take it away. The floor is yours.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Sabine. Hopefully everybody can hear me. But yeah, I'm going to, I think, get a little bit more granular now. I think Solar's or Richard's presentation was very good sort of place to start, and now we're going to dig in a little bit more on sort of what the job potential looks like, and what the UK labour market is doing in particular in the solar context. So as Sabine said, I'm a senior policy advisor for Green Alliance. I focus on international trade policy currently, so a very sort of trade heavy group today. But as Sabine also mentioned, I was previously with Solar Energy UK. So this presentation is largely on the largely specific to a piece of research that Green Alliance did recently. But by all means, please ask questions afterwards about sort of the reality of working in the industry and what the sorts of jobs are, because there is a lot, as Sabine was saying, beyond sort of what is typically considered a solar job. So diving into the report, we published this in July this year. Basically, what we did was compare two different pathways for decarbonizing the energy sector. One is based on the government's current energy security strategy, which we've touched on a bit already. So that is, quite an ambitious. It doesn't have a specific number in it for solar, but if you model out, or if you just extrapolate from their sort of up to 5 times as much solar aspirations, then that's potentially 70 gigawatts by 2030, which is quite quick, or 2035, I believe. These are both looking at the period from now to 2035. The other trajectory that we looked at was based on a study that Regen did on what it would take to fully decarbonize the power sector by 2035. Their estimates were a little bit more conservative for solar, and potentially paint a better picture of a more balanced picture of the trajectory that we're on overall. So take the numbers with a bit of a pinch of salt, I'd say, for the energy security strategy figures, because they are potentially a bit inflated. It's important also to just note on the methodology side, we're looking just at what we are qualifying as secure jobs, so not temporary jobs, which you often get in construction or manufacturing or installation. These are sort of full-time permanent jobs in solar. So what did we find? One of the things, first and foremost, is just the job intensity of solar and actually renewable energy in general compared to fossil fuel energy. These numbers may look familiar. These are all based on a study that the UK Energy Research Council did earlier this year. I believe in April, they published an updated version of their analysis of the job creation potential of green technologies. So as you'll see, a high proportion of skilled jobs in solar, second only to onshore wind, much higher than fossil fuels, also much higher job intensity across the piece, with nuclear being number 1 and solar being number 2. So this is 0.5 FTEs per megawatt of capacity, so installed capacity, or another way of saying that is basically 500 FTEs per gigawatt of installed capacity. So if we're talking about needing, upwards of 90 gigawatts of solar to achieve net zero, that's a lot of jobs. So again, this is basically what is set out under the two different pathways. One is the government's current energy security strategy number. You'll see they've got specific figures for pretty much everything, but not for solar or onshore wind, and that's probably largely due to the fact that they're a bit more politically charged. But assumed 70 gigawatts by 2035 from the government trajectory, or in the range of 40 to 50 gigawatts under the regen sort of balanced pathway. So if we look at how this would break down, you're actually getting a bit more even regional distribution under the regen pathway. So the one on the left is the government strategy. The one on the right is the what regen called the low carbon acceleration pathway. And sort of under the energy security strategy, we're seeing basically the current regional distribution stays largely the same in terms of where jobs are created. So not surprisingly, a bit more down south and in East Anglia, but if we look at the regen trajectory, it's a bit more evenly distributed. I mean, hugely more beneficial in terms of job creation for the north, which is so great for leveling up if we go along this trajectory. This is a more granular breakdown on the right here. It may be a little hard to read, but the top bar for each of these regions is under the government trajectory, and the bottom bar is under the low carbon acceleration pathway. But you'll see this again is just another way of displaying the data from the previous slide. A pretty decent regional breakdown, not surprisingly, loads of jobs in the Southwest, as we would expect. But again, take this sort of regional analysis with a pinch of salt. This is just a linear extrapolation from where the jobs are currently located around the country. And again, this is hugely biased on where there's grid availability, where there's more sunshine. But as we know from working in the industry, there's loads of potential all the way north. Looking at Scotland, there's 3 times more solar in countries at similar latitudes like the Netherlands and elsewhere. So it's not necessarily as big of a difference in terms of the potential generation capacity, right, as this breakdown would suggest. So again, we're talking about 80% highly skilled jobs, 5 times more jobs per megawatt than gas. And so in total, what we're talking about here is at least 15,000 new jobs in the next 13 years, and 13,000 of those would be highly skilled jobs. And this is just based on the ONS skill classification. So at the bottom of the chart here, these different colors in these bars are just how the ONS breaks down their classification of higher versus lower skilled jobs. And just to give you a bit of a fun comparison for my friends in the solar industry, this is what the solar looks like compared to nuclear in terms of regional distribution. So exactly as we always say, it creates jobs everywhere, which is a great bonus of highly distributed renewable energy technologies. Another important point here is on productivity. So we published another report earlier this year looking at productivity specifically and how we hit net zero in a way that actually gets us out of the current sort of productivity stagnation period that we've had for a while in the UK. The important thing to note is that solar, or really all renewables, are heavily on the pro-productivity side of the scale. You'll hear some people sometimes saying, oh, well, it's more job intensive, so that means it's actually worse. It's actually less productive than something like coal or oil and gas. But that's kind of missing the point. You're talking about delivering the same good, so the same energy for a much lower price, including the costs of labor. So that's higher productivity output from solar, even though it is more job intensive per megawatt. And it also means because we are actually, able to generate more energy domestically and rely less on imports, we're retaining additional jobs in the UK. We're having more domestic capture of value from the sector. So it's not just more people doing more of the same, it's more people doing better things all across the board from a productivity perspective. So looking at sort of the recommendations that we had on how we maximize job creation potential, a lot of this is really about incentives and training and transition and making sure that it's equitable. So we want to maximize the leveling up benefits of job creation. So not just concentrating all of the solar sector in the South. We want it to spread out as much as possible. So focusing on deployment, obviously first and foremost. There's a lot that can be done, and it is sort of in motion to reform planning policies, the National Policy Statement, the National Planning and Policy Framework to accelerate deployment of solar. We had some pretty big wins, particularly for large-scale solar in my time at Solar Energy UK to unlock some faster deployment, which is key. Delivering, making sure that any reforms that we're making are targeted to on the governance side of things to, again, accelerate deployment. So a net zero duty for Ofgem, for example, accelerating digitalization, which is something that there are lots of different work streams on in the solar sector at the moment. And then making sure that your tax policy is also aligned to accelerate deployment. So there's a super deduction that the government introduced. One of the things they introduced is in response to COVID crisis to focus that super deduction on the financing of green energy specifically, to make sure that we're targeting the windfall tax a bit better. It's not really that well targeted at the moment. As we saw, Shell didn't really pay any money in tax this year, even though there was ostensibly a windfall tax levied on them. And then again, making sure that the business rates regime is incentivizing solar. So we spent a lot of time working on this when I was at Solar Energy UK, making sure that on-site renewable technology is not disproportionately taxed compared to higher carbon types of on-site generation. So making it cheaper for people to put solar panels on their business than it is to put a diesel generator on their business, for example. Again, there's a lot of jobs that there's going to be a lot of upheaval, I suppose it's safe to say, in the coming years as we pivot from dirtier energy to cleaner energy. We have to make it as easy as possible for people to retrain, to upskill, to reskill, and to make it simpler, as simple as possible for people to switch jobs, not face sort of prohibitive cost barriers to switching jobs, and to make it easy for people to access the resources they need to figure out, where we're going, where should I be looking for a career. The whole point of having this conversation today, for example. So centralizing information, making it easier to access, and making it and supporting the investment costs of businesses in upskilling workers, but also supporting workers' costs in transitioning to different industries as well. And then, part and parcel of this is, of course, making sure that working in renewable energy and solar is attractive. So, not just, you should do it because it's good for the planet, but you should do it because it's a good place to be as an employee as well. So making sure that what workers think is factored into the planning for how we do, for how we upskill, how we retrain. So there's lots of work going on around the country at the moment on local skill improvement plans, making sure that it's not just the voice of business at the table in those revisions, but workers as well. So we actually are identifying what barriers there are for people that are trying to switch jobs and what skills we actually need and how sort of supply and demand is actually working there. And making sure that we're supporting communities as well. So there will be, as the communities where fossil fuel infrastructure is winding down, where workers may need to relocate, where, we can help to support, those communities to transition to other sectors of the future, and also to support workers through life changes, through job moves, and house moves and so on. Again, targeted policies to make sure that we're actually supporting those who are most likely to want to make the switch, and also reaching those who are maybe not thinking about it, but just because they haven't seen the right information at the right time, making sure that we're getting in front of those people when when the time is right to help them make the move as well. So that's where I'll stop, and happy to, again, please ask questions about what it's like working in the sector, as well as on the details of the study. And my email is here as well. I'm assuming we may send the slides around afterwards, but if folks want to copy that down, feel free to shoot me a note directly after the webinar.
Thanks, Cam, for that really great presentation. Really positive to see so many jobs across the UK being created. Obviously great for levelling up as well, to see that regional breakdown. So yes, if anyone has any questions for Cam, please do pop them in the comments. In the meantime, Cam, how would you say the kind of perception of solar maybe impacts kind of the labour market? There's obviously a lot of young people who don't want to work for kind of big oil and gas companies. From a kind of environmental perspective, they kind of want to work in that renewable sector. And then also on the flip side of that, there is some obviously negative rhetoric around solar, but how does that kind of, you touched on that perception piece at the end, sort of green work is good work. Yeah, how does that sort of narrative around solar, does it impact the labour market, if at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you have to imagine that it does. I think as you say, I think that certainly for younger folks that are just entering the labor market now, there's a lot of people who want to who want to work for something that they believe in, and something that's making the planet better and the environment better. And solar definitely ticks all those boxes. I know that from what we both know from working in the industry that even though a lot of these companies look the same as many other big energy companies from the outside, the reality is that the day-to-day working in them is very different. Everybody is really passionate. Everybody is there because they want to make a difference. They want to improve. They want to address climate change. That is one of the real underpinning things for working in the sector at any level, that I think is very different from some of the more traditional kind of private sector jobs that you might find. I think that we know from the polling that the government has done that solar's hugely popular, the most popular technology of any renewables. So it's very well received by the UK public in that sense. There is still, we did a fair amount of work on this, trying to address some of the misconceptions about solar. One being, one common one being, oh well, it's not sunny enough in the UK for it to work. I think that's more maybe the kind of perception challenge that we need to tackle. That actually solar is very viable. I mean, it's already a huge proportion of our energy supply, and it's only going to get bigger, 2-3-fold at least in the next decade. And just the viability of the sector long term in the UK, I think is a key point to sort of stress from an industry perspective, in enticing people to join up.
Yeah, no, I think that is really interesting. And of course, there's a lot of data which shows that solar is actually really popular. That's done by Solar Energy UK. So a lot of debunking of those myths as well, that other people there's a perception that other people don't like solar, but actually it is very popular amongst the public. Sorry, my doorbell's just gone. There is a question in the comment section. Sounds like.
Sorry, I was going to say Mike's got a question quickly.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Mike, did you want to come in? Apologies.
Yes, just a related question, actually, Cameron, and that is a lot of the backlog of solar projects at the moment is at utility scale. And there's some really rather large solar farms being constructed, a lot in that sort of 100 megawatt range. And our previous Prime Minister was making comments about the misuse of agricultural land, etc. Do you think we're going to get a pushback, a kind of a pushback from the public against utility scale solar? And is that going to affect the trajectory that we're currently seeing?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that I think there's certainly a concern that the kind of messages that are coming out from the government currently are going to generate a bit more backlash. But I think the reality is when you drill down on this, a lot of people are actually very supportive of having solar, even large-scale solar farms in their communities. So we worked with Copper, who's they're a consultancy firm that looks specifically at large-scale infrastructure projects. We did a piece of polling work with them pretty recently on attitudes towards large-scale solar specifically, which actually found that it was hugely popular, and it got more popular the more people knew about it. So there's a lot of sort of synergies for solar farms with nature recovery, with improving biodiversity and species populations, and delivering net gain. Which I think is key to to a lot of the other sort of commitments the government's trying to deliver on. So, and it's also very popular amongst farmers because it's providing them with a reliable revenue stream, so they can actually continue farming. So some of the rhetoric that we're seeing is kind of the typical NIMBYism rhetoric, I think, rather than specific sort of pushback on solar. Itself. I mean, it's much easier to sort of camouflage solar behind a couple of hedgerows than it is to camouflage a wind turbine. So a lot of those sort of visual impact concerns that are often the main concerns are pretty easy to address as well in a proper planning process.
Great talk. Thanks, Cameron.
Great. Yes, that's a really good question. And if anyone is interested in that research on kind of public attitudes, definitely check out Solar Energy UK. There's a really great debunking of those myths. So we've got a great question in the Q&A box. It sounds like there could be an increased demand for skilled solar technicians, installers, and across the board in other roles as well, for high skilled jobs as well. But what evidence is there for the capacity to actually provide those workers? And what are some of the obstacles around meeting that supply, do you think, Cam?
Yeah, no, that is the question, really. So yeah, thank you for that one. I mean, the evidence that we've seen to date is that there is not nearly enough supply of skilled technicians, installers. I mean, a number of different, like any angle that you want to come at solar from, particularly after leaving Europe, the supply is not matching the demand and the pace that the industry is growing. So I had so many conversations with solar developers who said, I could be installing 3 times as many projects as I am currently. I just can't hire enough high voltage technicians, for example. So if you want a job for life, train to be a high voltage PV installer. There is no shortage of demand for those roles. People are trying to recruit as fast as they can. And again, this is why I think as part of the recommendations in our study, we said you've got to make it as easy as possible for people to retrain and transition and upskill, because we were a lot of the companies, the big developers in particular that are operating in the UK are also operating all over Europe. And if it's way too much of a pain to bring people into the UK on sort of temporary work visas, they'll just stay in Europe and work on other projects there. There's no shortage of demand for labor in Europe as well. So we have to grow our domestic skill base as you know, in response to that dynamic very rapidly if we're gonna keep on track with these targets. But that's not just sort of, you know, again, it's not just sort of the EV, the high voltage people and the electricians. It's really across the piece. I mean, people need they need planning. You know, the planners. They need people to scout out the land and do, you know, work with Ofgem, with National Grid, with the local energy suppliers as well, to kind of get these projects over the line as fast as possible. So, you know, the other thing to just touch on, I guess, is the kind of the less obvious sort of roles that there are in solar. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with sort of GIS, remote sensing, you know, AI, drone technology for solar, in the solar industry at the moment. So a lot of the like a lot of really interesting developments there, also on sort of the network analysis, data and IT side of things. You know, as we transition to more renewable energy on the grid, we need really, really good real-time information on what's happening with power flows, and that is a whole new world of you know, for jobs and for tech, to really have a much better view of what's going on the grid, and that's a really interesting space as well. So it's yeah, there's no sort of shortage of angles to come at renewable energy from.
Thanks, Cam. That was really interesting. And yeah, in the interest of time, I think we're going to have to move on to the next presenter now. But yeah, thanks again. That was really brilliant. So next up, we have Molly Morgan, Senior Research Analyst at Exawatt. Molly has a background in physics for undergraduate and an MSc from University of Sheffield in solar cell technology. And now Molly works for a consultancy which provides market analysis and strategic forecasts for solar PV, electric vehicles to enable decarbonisation through electrification. Molly, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Sabine. Yeah, so as Sabine said, I'm currently a senior research analyst at a Sheffield-based company called Exawatt. So I will start by, I'll tell you a bit about my background and how I came to be at Exawatt, and then I'll tell you about what Exawatt do specifically, and then I'll go on a bit about my day-to-day role, and hopefully that will give you all a good example of kind of a day in the life of an analyst. So a good example of where you could be. So I have a BSc in physics from the University of Sheffield, and from then I stayed on to get my master's in a degree which is titled Solar Cell Technology. And whilst I was doing the master's, my project was in looking at anti-reflective layers, so it was quite specific. And I kind of left the master's not really knowing what I wanted to do. So what I went and did is I went and did some work experience at a Sheffield-based company, Exawatt. And whilst I was there, I figured out that was what I wanted to do. So I ended up staying on, becoming a full-time analyst. And now I'm a senior research analyst at Exawatt. So as Sabine mentioned, Exawatt has a mission to accelerate global decarbonisation through electrification. And we aim to do this by providing consulting and analyst services. And we have a range of customers kind of span the whole supply chain of all of our industries that we're in. So we have quite a broad portfolio of customers, which means that in kind of this line of work, there's always something new to look at, and there's always like a new question being asked to us. And we've been, a few of my colleagues that have done PhDs have said that this job is, they feel like it's as close as they can get to doing a PhD without doing a PhD. And Exawatt started in 2015, and it was started looking at solar PV, which is obviously the sector that I'm in. And then since then, Exawatt have added power electronics, so like the conversion of energy and energy storage to our portfolio. And with being able to look at the industries from different angles, it means that we can kind of cover like the broader range of electrification. And so we've got a good basis of how these different industries marry up with one another, and we've got different insights on the industry. And by covering those three pillars, Exawatt covers the generation, conversion and storage of electricity. And as a company as a whole, like I've just mentioned a bit about the supply chain, but we look at the whole supply chain. So we look at like the manufacturers and right up at the upstream and the individual inputs to the end product. So in my case, solar panels. And then we also look at each individual step of the supply chain. And that's why our customers are able to span the whole supply chain, because we have sort of like information at each stage of the supply chain. And we also have a big focus on cost, and this informs a lot of our analysis. And one of our biggest products in PV, which I'll come on to mention in a minute, is all around this cost model that we have in PV. So I'll stop talking about the rest of it now, and I'll focus on PV specifically. And mine and my colleagues in PV's work focuses around, we have a set selection of quarterly reports that we do each quarter. And those are those three that I mentioned at the top there. In the next couple of slides, I'll go on to a bit of detail on two of those specifically to give you a better sight of what those actually are, because those sort of don't mean a lot at that stage. And then we also have a lot of partners in the industry, one of which is the module testing company in America, PVEL, and we also do a quarterly report with PVEL. And then on top of all our quarterly repeating products, we also do a lot of bespoke and one-off projects. So clients are able to come to us, and if they've got a question, or if they think they have a question that they want to ask us, we can answer it or tell them that they're sort of trying to think about the wrong aspect of the question. So quite often that happens where we say, we understand what you're trying to ask us, but we think you should be looking at a different side of the market instead. And that is why, kind of the last point on the bespoke projects, that's why there's my job sort of always changing, and there's always new things to learn about, and every time we get a new question, it's like, oh gosh, like we've actually never thought about that, or we've never thought about it from that point of view. So I think the best thing about being an analyst for me in PV is that no day really is the same, and that I always find that my list of things to learn is always getting longer. So I'll talk about two of the quarterly products that we do to hopefully give you a bit of a better insight of exactly what it is that I do. And the first is to do with this product that we have called the Module Tracker. And so this basically, it'll give a customer like a snapshot of what's out there available to buy from manufacturers at the moment. And I gather the information from that by looking at publicly available data sheets. And then once I've gathered that information, I have a very big Excel spreadsheet, and I can produce all this analysis. And examples of this are obviously module efficiency is a massive one, the temperature coefficient of the different technologies. And then we also do forecasts, our own internal forecasts of where we think the forecast, the efficiency of each technology will end up in the future. And this, once we've done them, we're obviously able to compare them to manufacturer and industry's own roadmaps. And then also on the data sheets that we gather, there's a lot of information on things like wafer size and module architecture. And wafer size has been a big one over the last couple of years. And in the time that I've been at Exawatt, which has been like the last 2 years-ish, I've been able to see the industry transition from like a standard M6 wafer size to the larger wafer sizes of M10 and G12. So that's something that's one of the things that I like about being an analyst in the industry, is that compared to academia, you've got these very real things that happen in the world that you're able to track and sort of be at the forefront of. as it's happening, as the industry's changing. So I think it's really interesting to be able to watch the market evolve and almost be involved in it as the market's changing itself. And then, so the bottom snapshot on the right hand side there is an extract from, well, they're both extracts from our module tracker, but the bottom one is an example of the spread of efficiencies that we see for each technology in our data set. And then that is what informs our forecasts, which are on the top. And so the second piece of work that I will talk about that I'm involved in is called our market tracker, which is another quarterly report that we do. But this one looks at the PV supply chain. So all the way from polysilicon to module, we track a large number of manufacturers at each stage. And then, so that's why this report's quarterly, because we get their quarterly reports. And so from what each manufacturer discloses, we can come up with forecasts for how much manufacturing capacity there will be around the world for each stage of the supply chain. And then we can compare that to our end demand estimates. And so part of this is I will gather information from industry bodies around the world and sort of compile them and then produce our own forecasts to see what the installation demand is for PV around the world and in all the key regions. So once we've got our forecast for production and our forecast for installations, we can compare the two and they sort of feed into one another. And then this one also includes information, because we've gathered all the information on the separate manufacturers, we can tell people how consolidated the market is and inform people on geographically where the most manufacturing is happening. And so that can be informed by things like policies that are announced and like all the stuff that's been happening in the US recently has fed into these forecasts a lot. So with this, well, with this and with all our work, it's very important that we're up to date in the industry. So that's another reason why everything is always changing in this job role, and there's always so much to learn because you've got to be on top of the news and always just aware of what's going on sort of politically in the world as well, because that feeds into all of our work. So I thought, rather than spend loads of time talking about the nitty-gritty of what I do that might not register with people, I thought I'd sort of reflect back on how I feel about being in this job, having been in academia. And I was struggling to come up with things, but I came up with 5 things that I thought would be useful for me to know before I found this job. And the first being is that the PV picture is a lot bigger than I would have ever thought. And there are so many different ways of looking at the industry that I would never have thought of in academia, because obviously you're very focused on a specific topic and you know so much about this one thing. But then from being in my job for 2 years, there are things that I would never have thought about that would impact the market so much. And it's just very, I don't know, I just think it's very nice to be in this industry where you'll never have a complete picture of the market and there's always so much more to learn and so much more to do. And then my second point was that the market adapts and changes so quickly. And an example of this was the wafer size example that I used on one of the previous slides. And particularly at the moment, there's so much change in the industry that it's so interesting and there's always so much to be learning about and reading about. And it's really nice to be able to look back, even in the space of 2 years, and be like, wow, the market's developed so fast in such a short space of time, and that's only going to continue. So if you are looking to be in a role where it's constantly changing and there's always more to learn, then PV is great. And then my third point was how resilient the solar PV market is, because this might be a bit specific, but in the past year or so, there's been the price of polysilicon has shot up. And what surprised me at the time about this was not particularly that the price had gone up, because there was a supply-demand imbalance, so that was inevitable. But what surprised me about this was how resilient the market was, and that even though like the biggest raw material in PV skyrocketed, the market just carried on strengthening and strengthening, and the market itself just shifted to be able to deal with this like issue. And I found it really interesting how manufacturers really quickly change their areas of research to be able to adapt to this problem and overcome it. So they reduced their polysilicon consumption in any way they could. And that was really interesting to see how quickly manufacturers could identify a problem and come up with a solution for it. And then obviously that fed into our work, and we had to adjust our forecast because things like kerf loss in the polysilicon usage dropped dramatically because they'd focused all their energy on it. So that was something that was interesting to me as well. And then number 4, how important the real world is. So I guess this came to me because when I was thinking about what I know now compared to what I knew when I was still studying, I hadn't thought of the impact of things like the pandemic and things like policies and governmental bodies. I hadn't ever thought about how they could impact the market, which I guess that kind of links back to my first point, is that leaving academia, it sort of broadened my horizons on, wow, there is so much to think about when you're in the real world. It's not just being in a lab and focusing on one thing. And then, yeah, I guess point 5 is pretty much the same again, is that how much there is to learn. And I guess I'll finish by echoing my point that if you are interested in going into a role where everything's constantly changing, you're constantly being pushed to learn new things and adapt, then I think the PV market will continue to challenge, well, it will continue to challenge me. So I continue to think it'll be a great opportunity for anyone who is keen to be involved in it.
Thanks, Molly. Is there any questions at this point from the audience? If not, maybe, so do you want to talk a bit about, Molly, about how the kind of context of the energy price crisis has potentially affected any of your work, if it has at all, and then how has that transition towards renewables kind of impacted your company or your role at all?
Yeah, so with the price rises, interestingly, it only made the company stronger, because a lot of people were obviously then turning their attention to us, because we carry a lot of information on that. And I think that given that things in the world are going to carry on being quite unstable for a while, I think that the market is going to, well, the market for analysts and people in our position, it's only going to carry on being stronger. But that is something that we have to sort of stay on top of, and we have to continually monitor the market, because things like electricity prices, they all feed into our cost model. And one of the things that we're being asked a lot at the moment with policies and incentives coming in, particularly like in the US, so we're getting a lot of questions on, okay, well, how does the difference in electricity prices affect where around the world you would set up manufacturing sites? So that's something that we have to build into our models and keep continuously monitoring and updating.
Fab, thanks. We've got another question actually from the audience. So does Exawatt face much competition from customers or consultees?
So yes and no, because we are relatively niche, but we definitely do have competitors, just as any company would. But we do often end up well, we often end up on panels and at events with our competitors, and we quite often end up collaborating with them. And you'll find that we have competitors where, so our cost model is what we would consider our strongest bit of work in our portfolio. So if we know that somebody could answer a question from a customer better than us, we'll simply pass it on to one of our competitors and they do the same to us. So although that we do have some strong competitors and there are a lot of great consultants and analysts out there, I think it's strangely quite a nice, there's quite a nice back and forth between us all, and we're very well connected with the other analysts at the other consultancies.
Fab, thanks. Yeah, great questions, by the way. If anyone has any more, just keep them coming and we'll field them through. But yeah, thanks, Molly. In the interest of time, I think we can move on to the next presenter. So next we have Dr. Laura Skade, who currently works at BEIS. So that's the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, as a senior energy engineer. And Laura has a really interesting background, gaining her PhD from Oxford University in condensed matter physics. So Laura, if you're there, by all means, over to you. I think you're on mute, Laura.
Sorry, just trying to share my slides. Here we go. All right, thank you very much for the introduction, and also to the other speakers for the very interesting talks. So today I'm going to talk about my personal career experience so far. And as mentioned, I worked in the perovskite solar cell field in Oxford University before actually starting my path in the civil service. So when in academia, so I did my PhD in Henry Snaith group, and I was supervised by Henry and another professor, Paolo Radelli. My experience was great. It was really interesting. I was working on specific intrinsic properties of double perovskite semiconductors for solar cell applications. So I don't know if in the audience there is anybody working on perovskite, but yeah, this is what I experienced in that context. So after my PhD, I had to decide which way to go, and this is, I feel it was quite challenging for me. Sometimes people have a really clear idea of what to do after the PhD, some other times not, and that's completely fine. So here are some things that I explored when I was looking for a position. So environmental consultancy, R&D in industry, management consultancy, data science. I also applied to some postdocs, and ultimately I was left with a choice. So I had an offer from NREL and an offer for a technical role in the civil service. So this was quite tricky for me because obviously NREL is quite a prestigious institution. But ultimately what I had to think about is what would work for me and what my inclinations were. And I felt like at that stage in my life, I needed something that was a bit more looking at the bigger picture, maybe a desk-based job. So I wasn't really wanting to continue working in the lab and perhaps having a more direct impact. So that's why I ultimately selected the civil service, and very happy so far with my choice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my department, my team, and ultimately I will highlight some differences that I personally experienced between the civil service and academia. So BEIS. So BEIS is the UK Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And basically what they're responsible for is energy and clean growth, climate change, business, industrial strategy, science, research and innovation. And the main department, so the department where I work is in London, in 1 Victoria Street, right next to Westminster. So quite a nice walk in the morning when I get to work. I am in a technical team, which is in a directorate that is called SICE, the Science and Innovation for Energy and Climate. And my team is called the Technical Energy Specialist team. So this was quite a smooth transition, I have to say, because this team, all the team members have a PhD as a minimum. Some of them have a postdoc, or also have a path. Had a path in academia and then joined industry for a while. But in general, we all have a very similar background. And the team is responsible for giving expert support for the policy teams and ministers across various fields. So it might be renewables, carbon capture, low carbon heat, electricity, industrial decarbonization, and smart energy, amongst many. And I'm currently specifically working on smart energy, so a bit of a change from what I was doing in my PhD. Something else that we do is provide science and engineering analysis. So, for example, do some modeling that still can be a support to policy, so to provide advice and direction to policy. And also we coordinate with innovation teams, or we run ourselves innovation programs innovation programs that I will talk a little bit about in the next slide. So some examples of what we do. So first of all, the Energy Entrepreneurs Fund. This is quite an interesting fund, which I really like. So this fund supports the development and demonstration of state-of-the-art technologies, products, and processes in the areas of energy efficiency, power generations, and heat and electricity storage. And we had 9 rounds of this fund. And so far, we've invested about 102 million of grant money across 214 companies. And these companies usually are small and medium enterprises, but also startups. So quite exciting projects. And what I really like about this fund is that first of all, we are involved as technical experts with reviewing the application that come in. And so you get to see a very widespread of different technological innovation. And so there is a lot to learn. And you get to get in contact with a lot of interesting projects. And at the same time, we might also act as monitoring officers. So that means that's the role of the person that from base side is visiting the company, making sure that everything is going well and that the project is successful. So that means that we might travel a lot and actually look at the innovation itself, and so get to the industry site itself, which I really enjoy. Absolutely interesting, and I got to see a lot of really cool technologies. And then another example might be the Flexibility Innovation Program. So this wants to enable electricity system flexibility through smart, flexible, secure, and accessible technologies and markets. So one example of this is the smart home of the future, in which all of your appliances are smart. You have a smart charge point, a smart washing machine, and everything is working well and kind of supporting national grid or the distribution network in delivering their services. And this basically is will fund innovation across a range of key smart energy applications, and up to 65 millions are available for this funding program. And another very interesting program that I got in contact with and I worked for is space solar power. So this is also a program that basically was born from our team, following a consultancy work developed by Fraser Nash which is a consultancy firm. And the project that we procured demonstrated that space-based solar power is feasible, which is quite exciting. And so this program wants to support the development of technologies associated with space-based solar power systems, which could help with the net zero ambition. And this funding scheme has up to 6 million in innovation funding in the past, because now competition is closed, but had up to 6 million in innovation funding available. So as you can see, quite a spread of innovation programs, even though these are only 3 of the projects that I've been involved with so far. So really interesting things and a lot to learn. About learning, I feel like since I've been in BASE, I learned really a lot of new things, which is what motivates me. And here I listed some of them. So for example, I got to learn a lot about policy, how does that work in terms of consultation and then regulation, stakeholders management, which is something that I don't think I've done much in academia, just my personal experience, and kind of like understanding what the key stakeholders are, how to manage conversation with those key stakeholders from industry, academia, other government departments, or other government agencies, and so on. Project management, so definitely quite a good learning and development scheme in BASE. You can usually sign up for quite a lot of courses, so I've done a few project management courses as well, and I've definitely done some on-the-job project management, and obviously that's quite interesting, because the main objective of a PhD student obviously is to complete their project, so you're still kind of managing your project anyways. But I think in terms of project management in BASE, I've experienced more people management rather than a specific technical project management. I've learned to look at the bigger picture a bit more, which is something that I think I wasn't really focused on during my PhD. I was obviously looking at something really niche, something that probably me and a few other people in the world were doing, as it is for every PhD. While here, I'm always, I have to ask myself the bigger questions. So kind of like also thinking about UK-wide question, which is quite interesting. And also I learned some really nice technical things. Obviously, all of the application that come in and the assessment open a world of technological innovation, which is really cool. But specifically, I've been learning about the smart grid, a lot of cybersecurity things, radio communications, done some modeling, and also I learned a bit about the British Standard Institute's technical standards. So I've been specifically involved with one of the technical standards, and it's a complete other world, kind of like going through the technical details of standards. It's quite needs a bit of shift in mentality. So here I tried to write down some differences or comparison between academia and the civil service. Again, I want to specify this is my personal experience. So obviously there might be a very different experience of the civil service and of academia as well, just to clarify. So to me, academia was quite a specialist, needed quite specially niche knowledge, which is acquired through the years. So obviously you're working on a project for several years, and at the end of that, you're probably one of the experts on that specific topic. While in the civil service, I felt that I needed to be able to pick up new knowledge and skills really quickly. So maybe some minister question will come in on a specific topic, which needed a quick answer. Or again, for all of these values assessment, you need to kind of like understand the various different technological applications. Definitely both jobs felt purpose driven to me, which has been a big deal. Obviously I'm kind of a purpose driven person, so this has been great for me. But I feel like in academia, I was quite focused on my specific research area, while, as I said before, in the civil service, I'm thinking about that bigger picture all the time. In academia, I felt like my impact might be indirect or delayed, in the sense that obviously through publishing you have an impact, but then to see that maybe that transforming in technological application, that will take years, maybe opening a startup and having a breakthrough. So quite trickier to actually see the impact of your research. Obviously, someone else can pick up your paper and continue your research, but it felt quite indirect to me. While in the civil service, I feel like I'm having direct impact. So I'm advising policy, so that obviously impacts regulations in some way. Obviously, then I'm not a politician, so I won't make the final decision, but I can definitely see how that transforms in a more immediate impact. Well, I was in the lab most of the time in academia, while now my job is desk-based. In academia, I was traveling for conferences or collaborations, while in here also traveling for conferences. I've been in Paris and in Amsterdam this year for 2 conferences. And I have to say, this was one of my worries when I transitioned from academia. I really enjoyed getting to collaborate internationally and travel. And I was worried that this wouldn't feel the same in the civil service. But I have to say, in my team, I actually experienced I traveled quite a lot in the UK with site visits, but also I went to conferences. Then engagement usually is with other academics and sponsors in academia, obviously to get some money from the sponsors, but also to collaborate. While in the civil service, there is quite a lot of engagement with policy, industry, consultancies, academia. And I say academia again, because in my team, we might want to reach out to academics just for specialist knowledge on a certain topics, or procure a piece of work, for example, from spin-offs from academia. So there is a lot of engagement in that sense as well. And also through consultations, for example, because so that ranges from various parties. I felt like in academia, there was a lot of collaboration and partnering, while in the civil service, I need to negotiate, influence, or consult. The main intent of an academic is probably when you are a bit later on in academia, is to raise money for your research. Obviously, there are a lot of other things, running the projects and all of that, but I felt like that was the main goal. While in the civil service, the main goal is to, in my role, is to provide strategic advice, which is evidence-based. And finally, I feel like in academia, I was working with like-minded people. So everybody had an academic background, of course. So mainly that was my main interaction. While in the civil service, I'm working with people from a wide range of backgrounds. So obviously policy people, but also people that are very technical, like me, or a lot of engagement with industry and academia as well. So this brings me to the end. More than happy to answer any question.
Thanks, Laura. That was a really great and really rich presentation, especially about the comparisons of working in academia compared to for the public service. So that was really great. For those that are interested in civil service, I know that we do have a fast stream scheme, especially for science and engineering. And unfortunately, the fast stream is suspended for the time being, but I believe it's back to 2024 or onwards. So that's definitely something to look into if you're interested in civil service. Does anyone have questions for Laura? If so, just do pop them in the question answer box. We've had some great questions so far, so keep them going. In the meantime, Laura, it'd be really good to kind of flesh out some of from your presentation about work, kind of what led you to civil service and sort of in comparison to working for the private sector, if there's any differences between those, and if you feel that the work is rewarding. And I know that there is a question, I think it's posed to the wider panel, but on kind of work life balance, working culture in the civil service, and if how that is for you and for any of the other panelists as well.
Yeah, of course. So I felt like this job would have given me the best chance to actually make an impact. So as I said, I feel like working in the civil service could allow me to actually directly advise policy. And so this was actually a really exciting opportunity for me. And so I consider this as the best option for me personally. And regarding flexibility of working and work-life balance, I think in terms of work-life balance, especially, I'm quite happy. It wasn't as traumatic as a transition as I thought, because obviously academia can be quite flexible in terms of how you manage your time. We do have a flexi schedule, so we can kind of manage our hours as we think it's most appropriate. So that's quite that has been really helpful, and I felt like very rarely I work after hours. So this has been a great work-life balance for me.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, can definitely vouch for flexi time. That's a lifesaver, very useful. I'm very happy to have that in place. So I echo that. Civil service is a great place to work, and very much purpose driven if that's your thing, and working towards a bigger picture as well. So in the interest of time, I think we're going to have to move on to the final speaker. I think we're running slightly over time. So if everyone's happy to go on, if anyone has hard stops, then by all means do drop off. But finally, we have Dr. Neil McSporran. So Neil is a global portfolio manager for Incubator Program at NSG Pilkington. Neil has a PhD in chemistry from the University of Strathclyde, and now works for one of the largest manufacturers of glass and glazing products. So over to you for your presentation, and apologies if I've butchered any of those words. And yeah, I think Cam's got to drop off now, but thanks, Cam, and if anyone else has hard stops, that's totally fine. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. So today I'll talk a little bit about how we can leverage skills gained in photovoltaics in the glass industry. So my name is Neil McSporran. I work for NSG. You may have heard the name Pilkington. That's part of the NSG group. Pilkington were bought by NSG back in 2006. So we were a UK company. Now we're owned by a Japanese company. But as I'll show you, we're very much a global company. So today I'll explain a little bit about what I do and how the glass industry sort of operates and some of the areas we get involved in, and talk a little bit about my career path. So just as an introduction, as I say, I'm global portfolio manager for Incubator. So the first sort of bit of career advice is that maybe your job title isn't so important, because nobody ever knows what it means anyway. So what does that mean? Well, that means I run what we call the incubator within NSG. So that's based in the research and development function. And the purpose of it is to explore sort of future technologies for NSG, and also new business models. And we do that by sort of looking long term and having an outward focus. So we have a number of relationships that we're constantly building and maintaining with universities, companies, from startups to really big companies, to research institutes, as well as working with governments and other bodies. So it's a pipeline that we're constantly building, and always focusing on what could come next. But in terms of my academic career, I studied chemistry and I did my PhD at the University of Strathclyde. My background's in thin film coating, so PhD was focused on plasma enhanced chemical vapor deposition, and actually that was an EU funded program, and that's when I first learned about Pilkington and NSG. And then I did a couple of postdoctoral positions, both involved in thin film coatings for different applications in Spain and France. But back in 2006, I decided to move from academia into an industrial role, and because I knew about NSG from my PhD studies, I joined them in 2006. So before I talk about my career within NSG, I'll just speak a little about glass, and then where some of the skills I sort of learned and where the skills that you may have from photovoltaics come into play in the glass industry. So just as an overview of NSG, we're a global company. So as I said, we operate under the Pilkington brands and in many of our markets. We're pretty much all over the globe. And we employ about 27,000 people globally. Now, I think the important thing to start with is, the R&D function. It's not so much specialized into, photovoltaics or, I don't know, windows or cars. It's a global function, and it's very much split into sort of technology areas, but it really then sort of focuses in and meets the needs of all of these business units. So we operate 3 main business units: architectural, automotive, and technical glass. All are based around glass type products, but there's lots of variation there. And over the course of my career, I've been involved in everything from looking at glass for solar panels, which we'll talk about, to low emissivity coatings for glass, to putting coatings on glass flakes that go into cosmetics, to putting coatings on glass that goes into cars. So lots of variation, and always learning about new technologies as they come about. As I mentioned, we're global. So although I'm based in the UK and in just outside of Liverpool, I frequently on a day-to-day basis will interact with colleagues in the US, Japan, all over Europe, South America. The R&D function meets all of these different areas and all of these different technologies. So as I'll talk about with solar, for example, there's not a lot of solar manufacturing in the UK. But in our technical centre, we have a lot of experts in the glass and coatings used for solar, which then meets the needs of our customers in the US and Malaysia and beyond. So just thinking about glass more generally. So, glass and advanced coatings, as I say here, they play a key role in sustainability. So that can be low emissivity coated glass that we see in buildings. So that's designed to either keep the heat in the building, so it's thermally insulating, or it can be designed to do a little bit of that, but also keep the energy of the sun out of the building. So you can design coatings depending on your climate zone to do what you want to do. And that's a huge market, typically via sputter coating or chemical vapor deposition. We also make glass for thin film solar panels, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. That's a huge market. And again, in this case, we're making part of the solar panel with our coatings and with the glass substrate. There's also other thin film applications we find used for our glasses. Electrochromic applications is a growing area, so-called dynamic glazing. There we can produce transparent conductive coatings that act as, again, part of that electrochromic device. And then those are coatings that go from light to dark, and we're starting to see adoption in lots of buildings globally. Cars, there's always new developments in glazing for cars. And again, coatings are becoming more and more important, particularly as we move to electric vehicles. There's a lot of new challenges. How do you extend the range of the car and minimize the load on the battery? Again, we think about things to control the solar energy coming into the car, but also keeping the heat in the car once it's there, because the thing about electric cars, they don't generate any heat from the engine when they're driving, so we need to keep them warm as well as cool. So some opportunities there, and then onboard solar panels and what you can do with that energy is also important. And then finally, places that you don't think, like commercial refrigeration and white goods, again, energy efficiency is important. And we design a lot of coatings, and I've had a lot of customers in the white goods area where glass is used. There's tons of other applications, but I won't go through them all today. So thinking about manufacturing the glass, the first part is to make some glass. And if you've ever been to a glass manufacturing line, it's continuous production of glass sheets 3.2 meters wide. And we add coatings to that glass, either online or offline. So just talking about the online process, that's chemical vapor deposition, a technique that's used frequently in photovoltaic research. And we do that inside the float line. So we've got several coating beams positioned in what we call the tin bath, just as the glass is becoming solid. And with this coating regime, we can put down a number of different applications, from transparent conductive coatings to low emissivity, solar control, photocatalytic, anti-reflection, and many more. And the key thing is we design these for our customers. So we have coatings teams working on designing new solutions for our customers. We also, use this coating process to really, drive the photovoltaic industry. So this online process has really played a key role in enabling the thin film photovoltaic industry. And what we do is we deposit in a very large area a material called fluorine tin oxide in large pieces of glass, and then we ship that to our customers. And the key thing that we're doing there is, if you think about it, we're designing and developing the very first part of a thin film photovoltaic device. So our customer will take that glass with the TCO on it and then build their device on top using different deposition techniques. So we're a part of the device, and of course, by designing different layer structures, clever optical modeling, and clever control of the electrical properties, we can really improve the performance of PV devices. And it's big business, globally we have 4 float lines, 100% dedicated to solar energy glass with this TCO. This one in the US, for example, has a melting capacity of 600 tons of glass per day, all going to photovoltaics all over the world. We also operate offline coating or sputtering. Again, most people who are involved in PV will be familiar with sputtering as a process. It's a vacuum process using targets to put materials on the glass. Again, we do this in very large area, typically 3.2 metre by 6 metre pieces of glass. This is a picture of the line in St Helens in the UK. Not so much for the glass industry do we see sputtered coatings being used in solar. Typically it's CVD and another type of coating technology I'll mention. But nonetheless, this is an important technique and is used typically for low emissivity or solar control coatings based on silver. So again, very complicated coating stacks, lots of properties you need to think about. So optical modeling is very important in this area. Process control is very important. And we've designed very complex materials in very large area. The other offline process we make is wet chemistry. So sol gel and other types of wet chemistry solutions. Typically we'll put those down by spray coating, flow coating, or roller coating. And we can produce a wide range of chemistries and properties. We're talking about anti-reflection coatings, bottom left there, and on the bottom right, infrared blocking coatings. Again, put these down in a large area. And we see new opportunities in Europe for crystalline silicon PV. I mentioned thin film PV, and it's a small part of the overall capacity. Now, historically, crystalline silicon modules have been made in China and some other Asian countries. Now we're seeing huge amounts of onshoring back to Europe. So we see some real opportunities in Europe. And we can produce, in this case, rather than a transparent conductive coating, we produce low iron glass with anti-reflection coatings on it to maximize the efficiency. That's just an example of what we do. Bottom on the left there is just a regular low iron glass, and then we put an anti-reflection coating on the top to maximize the performance of the solar cell. So huge new opportunities in Europe for this, and we always need to look for new functionality in addition to the anti-reflection coatings. So thinking about career, since joining in 2006, I've had multiple roles within NSG Group. I started off in glass compositions and raw materials, so learning about how to make glass and focusing in on various areas like automotive, architectural. And then that's where I really first encountered photovoltaics, designing optimum glass substrates for PV. Then I moved to offline coatings. And again, this was sputter coatings, again, principally for architectural applications, but trying to develop new products for PV. And that's where I had the sort of concept, if you like, that I could use my technical knowledge in a more commercial way to drive new product developments and find new customers with our glass and glass substrates. So I moved into what we call a sector development manager role in the global commercial team, where I was identifying and developing new markets, but based around some of our core technologies. And then from that, moved over to the US for a number of years, where I was working with startup companies and lots of different areas to try to create new opportunities for our coated glass products. And then after that, I came back to the UK to run the incubator, where we're really looking at commercializing R&D technology and really bringing out brand new opportunities for the group in solar, but also in some other areas. So if you look at the future of the glass industry and some of the key topics, you know, sustainability is huge. We use a lot of energy, so we have to have a lot of manufacturing improvements to reduce our embodied carbon. Things like hydrogen use, recycling of glass, using renewable energy on our lines. We also have to continually develop new products to reduce operational carbon in buildings, cars, and in other places. You know, net zero buildings and electrification, it's not just about keeping the sun out or the heat in. We need to add new technologies using glass to buildings to maximize energy efficiency. So that can be building integrated photovoltaics, dynamic glazing. We're seeing a lot going on in infrared heating right now. So heating up the glass using coatings and then using that energy. And then not just more traditional PV, energy harvesting to power things like sensors and other applications. We're seeing a real growth in startups, university research, and in real products. And then we've got novel thin film photovoltaics. Lots going on in perovskite, organic PV for transparent materials, and plasmonics as well. So lots happening there. And then finally, digitalization, you know, looking at machine learning and other techniques to discover new materials, but also to drive process improvements. So then, you know, just to finish off really, you know, glass is everywhere. It really is, and it provides a huge variety of functions. And I think with the knowledge you learn doing PV research, you can then leverage that to go into a lot of different areas, because all that functionality is achieved using thin film coatings. If you want to stay in PV, coated glass plays a key role in all the future PV technologies. You can be a key part of the thin film device, control reflection and transmission into the cell, and also develop brand new technologies and find new applications for it, like in buildings, vehicles, and other areas. So, you know, glass is becoming more complex and more multifunctional. So there's a lot of different career paths, and yeah, there's always new things to learn. So thanks. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Neil. Really great presentation. We do have a question in the audience. So from Matthew Sutton, hi Neil, very interesting to see a different aspect of the PV industry. Thin film PV can often be fully spray coated, etc. Is the TCO deposition commonly done at different sites, these depositions, or are they done in the same line?
Yeah, sure. So typically what we do is we will manufacture those TCO coatings and then we will ship those to our customers. And it is our customers that will take those coatings and transform them into a PV device. Where we try to be a bit different is that we will try to tune our coatings to specific customers so that we can develop really, you know, high quality products for customers.
Great, thanks for that.
Just while I remember, sorry, Sabine, one of the questions was sort of the working structure, if you like. So typically I'll be in the office 3 days a week and at home a couple of days a week. Because we work in a sort of R&D function, it's kind of important to see people, because it's all those kind of informal interactions where you bounce off people and have a little chat over a coffee where some of the best innovations come from. So we do want to be in the office sometimes, but we don't need to be in every single day.
Great. Does anyone else want to come in on that? I think we can potentially open it up to the whole panel for any more questions. But yeah, I don't know if any of the speakers want to touch on the kind of work-life balance or the working from home versus working in the office, or the general sort of culture. Do feel free to come in on that.
I can maybe come in on just something a bit different. Yeah. So I think one of the interesting things, so, you know, my specialism was, I guess it was like thermal transfer through perforated metal sheets. And so that was my specialism, as a PhD, but it's totally changed now. So I think one of the things I've learned is that, maybe through your PhD, you get this really deep specialization, but sort of maybe joining sort of, non-academia, you lose your specialization. So I'm certainly not the expert of heat transfer through perforated metal sheets at the moment. But you gain a new specialism. So you find your own little specialism, and you find this sort of spot. And I think that's kind of interesting. So although you sort of lose something, you lose your, the specialism which you had as your PhD, I think actually you gain quite a lot in sort of broadening that specialism. And for me, it's like the solar governance is the sort of specialism. But for everyone else, it'll be something totally different. So maybe you'll become an expert in World Trade Organization rules and regulations, or something, or deployment policy, or how to subsidize heat pumps or something like that. You'll find a new and interesting specialism to sort of go down.
Thanks for that, Richard. So I think I don't see any more questions coming through from the audience. And I'm aware, I think a few people have dropped off maybe for other meetings today. We've gone a little bit over time. But yeah, thanks so much to the speakers. Really, really interesting to hear about the career options available. And yes, I think the recording will be available on the website soon, so do keep an eye out. So yeah, thank you to all the speakers, thank you to all the attendees, and hopefully see you at the next event. Cheers, everyone.